Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 2 Earth Episode 18, The Earth King. This episode is animated by JM Animation, and yeah, really good episode. Obviously this is where the plot and I suppose the setup for the finale really starts to come into play. And the core of the episode is obviously about the gang trying to actually now decide that they want to bring the news to the Earth King. They've solved a lot of their issues. Why not use that run of good fortune and just go after basically what they're in the city for, which is presenting the information about the eclipse to the Earth King, and then also the information about the conspiracy and trying to fix the major problems that the Ba Sing Se is facing. So you get this really cool sequence at the start where basically the team just attacks the palace and they just run through every single earthbender guard there and get right up in front of the Earth King. It ultimately is a cool scene because it gets across how powerful Team Avatar is. Does make the defenses of the Earth Kingdom look like a joke, which that plus the drill makes you kind of wonder, well, what have the Fire Nation been doing where they haven't broken through, if this is the quality of opposition they're going up against? Because it was really, really notable how much better Earthbenders Aang and Toph are than every other Earth Kingdom guard. They all just did the exact same little block of Earth attack, and then Aang and Toph are just manipulating so much more Earth than they are, offensively, defensively. It's just completely one-sided, that there's just no chance for the opposition because they're made to look like very low-level benders compared to our team, whereas I think it's a complete opposite of the Dai Li fight from the previous episode, where the Dai Li, even though they maybe one-on-one weren't a match for a Toph or an Aang, as a group they were a huge threat because individually they were really, really skilled and they were presented that way, versus these people who you feel like have we met any bender in the show who would struggle against these guys? And it's wow, the differential in terms of how they present these kind of different groups is very, very all over the place here. But they make it inside. We finally get to meet Earth King Kuei, which, this is basically his debut episode, even though we've, been alluded to him before. We've sort of seen him for a second before, but this is really his first episode. And I think one of the things that only recently has kind of been this big moment for me is just this guy's only 25 here. I think that's actually his age in this episode. He's only 25 years old. And I'm 25, so that's this crazy thing of wow, the king of Ba Sing Se is my age and he basically has no experience because of this conspiracy that's been going on. It's really, really crazy to think that. But of course, if you've watched my Avatar Weekly Discussion topic video I did a couple of weeks ago, a couple of days ago, I'll link it in the description. It covers a lot of detail about it's basically a 46th Earth King video, Kyoshi stuff, but it goes a little bit in depth in terms of why the position of Earth King isn't as strong as it once was in the past, with the idea of course being that the situation that's happened here, why Long Feng has the power in the first place, which I do wish this episode had went into. I think this should have been the episode to really heavily focus on Kuei as a character, develop his relationship with Long Feng, because they do have a notable relationship, and really just cover more of a background for why he as a king isn't very effective at this point in time. Because he became king when his father died when he was very young. I think it was 4 years old. I think it's either 4 years old or 6 years old. Either way, he had to take over as king when he basically wasn't able to fulfill that role. So Long Feng, who had managed to pull himself up from a position of not being in a great place in the city to being in a high level position, ended up as basically advisor to the king, in essence acting ruler of Ba Sing Se. And that was only of course able to happen because of all the stuff that Kyoshi had done in the past in terms of making that deal with the 46th Earth King to lose some of his power, to make him not all powerful but while still being the leader. And Dai Li came into play there, the position of Grand Secretariat, which of course Long Feng takes up after this. But the issue, of course, happens is that in that transition point when Kuei grows up and is actually able to assume the role of king, Long Feng, in terms of passing that position off to the king, obviously leaves things in a position where there's this kind of like stopgap between in information and the king, where like he's always there, and even though Long Feng technically is in this like position below the king, he gets all of the information that makes him effectively more knowledgeable and in a better position in the city than the king. So I would have really liked to have seen some sort of a flashback where we saw that happen, especially given that like in like the next 2 episodes with the whole Long Feng Azula thing, you know, she basically tells us, you know, Long Feng's story. We get the idea that he rose up from a low place. We get the idea that Kuei is in this bad position because he doesn't know how to rule, because effectively he took over at this point and then was never like treated as a king and never thought what was required, because Long Feng was always gunning for some sort of position where he had control. So Kuei being so inexperienced is all because of Long Feng, and I would have liked to have, you know, established that from Kuei's perspective, Long Feng has been nothing but supportive of him. He's taken over these positions when Kuei couldn't, and has advised him really well over all these years. And now he's suddenly having all these doubts about him, and it's meant to be this huge betrayal, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels very impersonal, even though they actually know each other really, really well. That Long Feng should almost be some sort of a father figure to Kuei, but they don't present it that way, like, at all. And given that the backstory presents it that way, and the episode just doesn't do anything with it, it's just like, oh, you've betrayed me, guards arrest him, and it's just done. Like Long Feng and Kun Kuei, like they didn't have a relationship whatsoever. Like even ignoring the fact that it's meant to be a very personal relationship, it didn't even feel like this was a position of like king and then position below the king. That there wasn't even not much of a sense of like professional either. Like it was just like, oh, he's my advisor, I trust him, and there was no sense of like a, you know, personality really to it all that much. But you know, how they go to convince him, obviously they bring up the idea of like Long Feng, of course, has a mark on his leg from Appa biting him. That works to convince Kuei to a degree, and it's this, you know, funny angle of Kuei actually being this very reasonable person, but Long Feng obviously being in this awful position where he has to manipulate every situation and make it out that they're the ones doing something wrong, but he knows he has lost complete control of this situation. The only thing he has going for him is that Kuei believes him more than he believes Team Avatar, but of course they weren't able to move the drill, and the drill comes up as a major talking point, of course, after the Lake Laogai incident. They try and use that as a point that has been obviously taken care of, but it is the drill that convinces Kuei of everything, that there is a war. This is Kuei discovering that there's a war, and there's a war that's been going on for a very, very long time, and that he's been lied to for his whole life, basically. So it's meant to be a huge moment for Kuei, and I think they sort of undervalue it by not really feeling like Kuei is like meant to be all that important of a character. So it is a little bit weird that I think they missed the mark of like this being in a way a King Kuei episode, and it just falls a little short. Like it's about the Earth King, but it feels like we don't really get to know him. That there's no commentary from nearly any character about the king. It's just that there's this sense of course, okay, the Earth King traditionally has never been outside the walls, and Kuei specifically has never been outside the palace. So it's him discovering all of this stuff. They present him as an inexperienced king who doesn't know much of his, you know, what he rules over. But I feel they missed the mark in terms of establishing why he's that way. That it's not on purpose. It's not because like Kuei as a person specifically chose this. It's just that that's the way he's been handled his entire life, because he's been king since he was 4. So there's that throughout the whole episode, and eventually he's convinced, and it leads to the cool moment by the end of they're all given, Team Avatar is given these basically scrolls with information that's related to them. So Aang finally gets the message that was on Appa's horn from Guru Patik, that, you know, he's going to teach him to learn how to use the Avatar state, which is a really cool reveal in that that's been Aang's plot this entire book. It's been how to control the Avatar state. Episode 1 explained to us in detail the Avatar state. Now we're approaching him controlling it, and that's an important thing. Of course, Aang would want to learn that. Sokka and Katara get a scroll with information of where Hakoda is, their father, and of course they're going to want to meet him. And with a war being planned, of course you'd want to involve the Water Tribe in that. You get a nice moment between brother and sister as Katara basically says that, okay, someone has to stay here. Sokka, you go meet Dad. It's kind of more fitting that you meet him than I. And she makes the sacrifice to stay back. And it's a nice brother-sister moment. He is really thankful that she's done this for him. Toph, of course, gets a message seemingly from her mother, like apologizing to talk about what's happened. And I like that Toph actually has a bit of an emotional reaction to it, that, you know, she herself, even though she left knowing that, you know, her parents really were never going to believe her, that she's actually quite emotional that seemingly her parents are coming around on it and are willing to talk about it more openly. Just presenting that, like, this is Toph's main arc. Unfortunately, they go more down the Xinfu Master Yu road and don't actually address it in the show, which is a little bit disappointing, but we move on. So we end up with this situation where Aang and Sokka are going off on Appa because they have to travel the most. Toph is just going to a different part of the city to meet her mother, and then Katara is obviously staying with the generals to help actually plan any sort of attack. While on the other side of the episode, it's the Zuko thing of, like, okay, he's made this big decision to, you know, basically leave Team Avatar alone and take a different path, but now he's actually, like, sick because of it. He's like, it's not just that he's like, oh, I'm struggling with the decision I've made. No, like, he actually gets, like, physically sick, and it's meant to be this comparison, like, I suppose the best core comparison is Lin Beifong in Old Wounds, when she has to have the acupuncture. The idea that literally in this world, if your inner energy is out of balance, it actually makes you, like, physically sick. So the idea that Zuko just made a decision and it affected him so much because it was such an important aspect of who he was and what it meant. It just speaks to the whole idea of, like, there's so much, like, symbolism in this, and that the idea of the two dragons, one being Iroh, one being Azula representing the Ozai destiny, Iroh representing the more free path that he can take. Which decision does he actually make? And the whole idea of the dragons, it was really well done. And then towards the end, the idea that he wakes up, looks in the mirror, he doesn't have a scar, but he has an airbending tattoo, and it's just this, like, idea of, is he forever linked with Aang, and what does that actually mean? Like, is it foreshadowing the reveal down the line that there's a deeper connection between Aang and Zuko, or is it just a thing of, like, you know, look at yourself from, like, Aang's perspective, imagine how he feels, that sort of thing. But obviously the result is that, you know, of course he wakes up and he's shockingly, like, cheerful about everything, and it's a really weird way to view Zuko as this really positive person, but just the idea that he's made this decision and it's actually, like, good for him. Of course, as I said in the last video, it's kind of ignoring the reality of, like, what's actually happening with the war, and it's probably something Iroh should be a little bit more aware of, especially with the whole Order of the White Lotus knowledge, that, like, Iroh just thinks Ba Sing Se will never fall, that Zuko will live a normal life and they can just ignore the war, but, you know, that's that. So yeah, I think that's most of the episode. It's a really well done episode. I wish they'd done more with Quay, but what they do is very well done to set up plots for each of the characters and have a good Zuko side to the episode. So that's been the review for the episode. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.